There you go. Yep.
Awesome blossom. Good evening, girls.
Good evening.
Here we are again, book number 3. Awesome. Well, obviously, I know we've chatted in text messages, and obviously, I think we're all on the same page that this was a very intense read and a very emotional read, to say the least.
hmm
Um, so my first question for us to just kick it off, who was able to have access to just the original novel and who was able to have access to the graphic novel?
I
I
had
had
the
the,
original.
and I had the graphic novel.
Okay. Which I thought was really interesting to compare both of them.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to see like what yours
Uh,
looked like. Yeah, so thanks for sending that to me.
oh
Um,
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
I mean the illustrations were or are they're really, really cool. A lot of them are, like there's lots of like I guess like muted colors in the background, like there's darkness. Um, but
It
they
immediately set the tone,
yes,
the
yes.
colors.
Yeah. And it helped me put a face to a name.
Mhm.
So I pictured like you had mentioned, like um being able to like visualize or imagine people
Mhm.
like characters.
Mhm.
Like for me, I would probably, yeah, I guess I can, but this actually, the graphic novel made it so much easier to do that.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and it's very, wow, very powerful. I had a lump in my throat when I was finished, and then I
Oh,
read it again after school
Mm.
today.
Oh
is
yeah, I
very
mean I
powerful.
would like to see the graphic novel version.
Yeah.
One thing I thought was interesting is I grew up obsessed with Lifetime television for women, and that's some dark stuff. I can't believe my
Uh-huh.
parents let me watch
Oh
it.
yeah.
And then like IDTV, Unsolved Mysteries. So even though I didn't grow up in a community that was high crime or gangs and this, that, and the other,
hmm
I knew about there's stuff out in the real world, right?
hmm
And then my student teaching, I was in inner city Birmingham in first and second grade, and we have bars on the windows and drug daddies
Mm.
for the daddies. They didn't have an
hmm
actual daddy, they called them pops. And I remember walking in my anthropology dress on the first day of that student teaching experience. I'm like, why y'all teeth so white? And just it was so when I first started reading just the chapter or just the regular novel,
Uh-huh.
I had pictures. And then when I looked at the graphic novel, the pictures in my head definitely came together. But then I thought
hmm
about, depending on your age group and who you're working with, the demographics of the type of students that you most likely would be sharing a book like this with. Some might have backgrounds, some might not. So, which one would they be able to connect more with? I
hmm
thought the graphic novel this picture, I thought was great because it was the first time I noticed the verse concept
Mhm.
in the novel part where it was talking about the earthquake. Because with
Yeah.
just the poem piece, it breaks in different areas to make it look
Yeah.
like the cracks of the earth. And then I saw this and I was like, the pictures and illustrated illustrations and how they put the poetry and verses together really brought a whole nother component to it with the graphic novel. So I thought that was really cool. But oh, I mean, it gives me goosebumps. If you just did a picture walkthrough, I don't know how you couldn't feel and experience without, you know what I mean? The pictures
hmm
just
Yeah. Oh
itself
yeah.
spoke volumes.
Well, I had no idea that this like all the different people that he was meeting, as the elevator came down, that was he was just it was in like his imagination.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And yeah, I thought like all this stuff was real. And then I was just like, oh my gosh, this is like him processing everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
The connecting of all the
yeah,
things that he really was blindsided from.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
It
it
was,
just it gets still gives
I
I
know,
really
I
have
know.
goosebumps. It's just it was so heartbreaking to me to see Will trying to put pieces together because I really think his big brother
Uh-huh.
tried to hide a lot from him
Yes,
Yeah.
protect
purposefully
him.
for protective purposes.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And to find out that Sean actually had killed somebody, that's why there was only 15 bullets,
Uh-huh.
one shot, and he got him. Um,
Oh, I did not make that connection.
yeah,
Yeah.
Aha.
because at the end I thought was epic. You finally
Yeah,
know
I
it's his
really like.
brother because you see the concept of him putting him in the
Yeah,
chokehold.
yeah,
That's what
yeah.
the
And
big
the
brother
headlock.
did. But knowing that his brother never actually spoke to him, and the concept of the creaking of the elevator and the flat line, it sounded like flatlining, which is symbolizing, the death
Oh, yeah.
experience that he actually had. And then you
Yeah.
see in the graphics novel study, I mean, his brother isn't talking, but he's wailing. And so I looked at it as his
Yes.
brother's trying to communicate with him these stupid rules. You're going to die too if you follow
Yeah.
through. Save yourself. He's trying to tell him, but he wants him to
Yeah.
make his own choice. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
you get to the darn last page. Oh, y'all.
Yeah.
Oh, the goosies that they just coming back.
Yes.
It goes, you coming, and this is all it is in the book.
Huh?
I
Yeah.
just threw the book. Shut up. So then, of course, when I have those books that end like that, I'm like, okay, where's the author? I want to know their take, and he doesn't reveal it, which is
Yeah.
Right.
really
Yeah.
interesting. So
Yeah.
that was a question I had for you guys before I shared my thoughts. What do you think actually happens at the end of the book?
We'll see in my version of it, and I had got the Kindle version, and I was looking, and there were discussion questions at the back. And I
Mm.
don't think that they were written by the original author, but I highly doubt they were, especially if he didn't give his take. But one of the questions, the last one was, where do you think Will was 5 years after this? So whoever wrote the discussion questions clearly was implying like he didn't follow through and that he was going to be alive in 5 years, likely meaning he didn't go through. And
Gotcha.
I definitely think the fact that it was a question at the end and not like, they said you come in instead of come on,
Mm-hmm.
that implied really it was up to him. So the fact that it was a question told me like he's not going to do it.
Yeah.
Whereas if it had been a statement,
Mm-hmm.
it would have.
I think like just how like his emotions throughout the book, um and like every person like that he had talked to, um like what they were saying to him was like really setting in, and it was almost like they were talking him down off the ledge.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I don't believe that he actually went with them. I think that he um decided not to.
Mm-hmm. Because I
Yeah.
think if he did go, that would have been the symbolism that you're going to go down the exact same path. And I think his brother was really trying to give him the opportunity to make his own choice
Mm-hmm.
with brotherly guidance,
Mm-hmm.
but also change the course of our family's history.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at, I mean, he's lost everybody. He's lost his uncle, he's lost his dad, he's lost his brother, he's lost his brother's best friend, he's lost his best friend from when he was a kid. Um,
So sad.
it was just heartbreaking, and then the constant cigarettes, and like
Uh-huh.
it was trying to hide him because he knew he was doing something that he wanted to hide from. I even thought, looking at how they were doing the countdown on the chapters,
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking, obviously, yes, it's an elevator because he's going down levels and he's getting
Mm-hmm.
close to, L. But knowing Uncle Mark was also a film, his desire to be a filmmaker, was it the countdown to the action? Was the
Oh.
action, I'm going to pull the gun, or was the action, I'm going to change the history of our family? You
Mm-hmm.
know, I just, I, it, he, this book, it was phenomenally written. Um,
I think Sean too, especially like when he taught Will the rules, and one of the rules was you never cry ever.
mhm,
And the fact that, when he met his brother in the elevator again, he cried. So he broke a rule first.
mhm.
Yes.
And Will tended to kind of follow what he did and guide. So, I mean, I think that was also the indicator that Will didn't go through with it because it's, my brother broke the rules first. So maybe they aren't really rules, so I can
Mm-hmm.
follow, in his lead and I don't have to abide by the rules
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
anymore.
That's good. A really good take.
Mhm.
And it really makes you think, who the heck do you read this book with? You
Mhm.
know, because I know where I teach, a book like this, it ain't gonna fly, right?
No.
So my thought process was, when you have a book that's this intense, do you immediately look at the demographic of your school? Do you look at the age of your, the schools within the school setting? And then do you survey them? And do kids feel comfortable enough to be surveyed and be honest? Where you see, oh my gosh, there is so many kids in our school that are experiencing a part of this type of violence. And then you put them in book studies where they have the commonality. Or do you get a counselor involved and bring a book like this to bring out, like, how many kids in a setting like this are just involved in drug deals?
Yeah.
Like, you think about, like, Lasseter, you got Woodstock, you got, what other schools? Walton, you got all these schools that are considered in, the triangle, the drug triangle that we've
Yeah.
had,
Yeah.
over the last 5 to 10 years, and it's extensively gotten worse. I still don't think a book like this is appropriate, but a book that explains to him the concept of, you know, addiction,
Yeah.
and pills, a book like this, but how would you know who's really involved in it? And are they really going to be willing to be honest with you? You know? So that was
What
sort
I
of my
would,
thought. What would you do?
I mean, I taught in a Title I school in South Carolina my first 3 years, and it was, I mean, elementary school, but it was fifth grade. And there were kids and their dads were in jail, were moms. One of my kids' moms stabbed another kid's mom, and police weren't involved at all because in that community, law enforcement wasn't trusted. It was very much, and there was no retaliation type thing, but it was one of those, we handle this within our community and we don't involve law enforcement. So I definitely saw that. And I was thinking back to, if I was teaching in that school, how would I have broached a book? Probably not even this one in that school, but there was another one that I read several years ago that wouldn't fly in my school now, but it's more for elementary and it's called Ghost Boys. And it's a story about a young boy um, who gets in kind of the crossfire and gets killed. And so it wasn't like it was an accidental thing, but because of the neighborhood that he was in, but it was designed for elementary students who were kind of dealing with that and learning,
Interesting.
some of the injustices. And what I would probably have done is, I like the idea of the guidance counselor,
Mhm.
bringing in or doing a small group. And then honestly, I probably in like book clubs select several books, that being one of them, but then have, others of different genres and not all, that one,
See what they
and
gravitate
say
towards.
something like, read the back of the book and say, oh, which one seems interesting? Then they could do, like a private survey type thing, and then kind of put them in book clubs based off of their interest level. So it kind of gave them a chance to pick it themselves.
Yeah,
So
it's a
I
good
wasn't
idea.
choosing it for them.
Mhm.
And if you did like an anonymous online survey, where they had to like rank the books or something and decide which looked the most interesting, or, you might be able to find some that way.
Yeah.
I I think that, and let's see, I'm hearing an echo. Um, I think that you definitely would have to ask parents
Mhm.
if they would allow their kid. Like I think that the parents would have to preview the book. And depending on the community, I mean, a lot of people are, I mean, they're very tight-lipped,
Yeah.
and the kids aren't going to tell their teachers what's going on. Um, so I think that would be something that would have to be established first. And if parents were on board, I think that the kids, I think, would, you know, be more apt to be honest and come together to share, what's happening in like what's reality for them.
Mhm.
But sadly, I don't think that um, would happen based upon, just like how tight these communities are. And like you said, they don't trust law enforcement.
Yeah.
There's, school systems, you know, they might not be as supportive because, of attendance and, just, I don't know. I think parents would have to be involved first. I think, it's wonderful for kids. I mean, to be able to, live or to see their lives portrayed in books like we had talked about last week. But yeah, these I guess, like themes in books that's what's hard,
Oh, for sure.
definitely.
Interesting. Agreed. Let's see. I knew I had questions on here. Did I save the wrong one? I
You would
know
ask,
one of the things I thought was really interesting was the concept of his anagrams, his
I didn't,
obsession with
Yes.
anagrams.
what was what I looked at, what anagrams are you talking about?
So if you look in this book, you would have pages like this. That's
Oh,
all that's on the page.
oh,
He would just take one word and then
uh-huh.
tweak it to say something different to make his connection. So like one that
Yeah.
stood out to me, I should have looked at that and compared it in the graphic novel. One
But
of
there aren't any.
his, oh really?
No.
I'd have to look at
Huh.
what that looks like. Okay, so one, it says Enneagram number 1, and he says alive equals a veil. And it's at the very start of him getting on the elevator. And so the page before it says, I take it back. I was scared. What if he had come to get me, to take me with him? So he thinks that this ghost is here to take him away, like he's dying. What if he had come to catch my breath? And then his Enneagram number 1 was alive equals a veil. He wants to stay alive. He needs to hide. And so then I
Yeah.
was thinking about the concept of all the smoke, like it's all trying to
Yeah.
hide because he instantly has guilt. I mean, it's so
Yeah.
obvious, like
Yeah.
reaching in, looking to see how many bullets, everyone can see me, but they can't. Everyone's going to know
Mhm.
it's here. It's the skeletons in the closet, so keep hiding.
Yeah.
I thought was really good.
Yeah, no, the graphic novel does not have them.
Yeah.
Interesting. I wonder if
And
it
with I noted the Alive in a Veil one too, and I was thinking also it almost reminded me of like the Harry Potter
just
book at part, when Sirius fell through that veil, and it was almost because that one was kind of pointing out like the veil between life and death
Ooh.
is so thin, and like the fact that it's so connected and that, a veil is something that, it's not very durable, you could easily break through it. You could just as easily walk through it as you could walk through a doorway. So, and
When
the
you think
fact that
about
he's
people
meeting,
wear veils in mourning,
yeah, oh
Mhm.
yeah.
I didn't even think about that.
And then it's always just all these people, together that he was interacting with, alive and dead. And it almost seemed, like their worlds were so close, separated by a veil and just part of the fragility
What was
too
another
that could
one?
be.
Uh,
I wrote down one that was feel
yes,
equals
was my
flee.
next one.
Say again?
Feel
Uh-huh.
equals flee.
Feel equals flee. Run from your
Mhm.
feelings.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was another. There were a lot of anagrams that I was like, oh, you're so smart. That would take
No,
me forever to
this one.
figure that out.
Okay. I I I read this.
One was, oh, I loved this one. Okay, so I'm a huge Top Gun fan. And I mean like classic Top Gun, right?
Yeah.
So this one was cinema. So when he sees his Uncle Mark and he's talking about, was big in the movies. Cinema equals Iceman. And he goes, I don't even know what Iceman is. Well, when you think back to Top Gun and who Iceman is, you have to understand Iceman in the beginning was very cold-blooded. Like, I'm
Mhm.
in for me. I'm going to be in survival. I'll do whatever it takes to take all of you out because it's all about me. And he goes, not sure what a nice man is, but it makes me think of bad dudes, cold blooded. And I was like, oh, that was such a good one.
Huh. No, this did not have that.
Oh man. Yeah, I'd like to see the graphic novel version just to compare to, because some of these I think the visual would be
Yeah.
really great to go
Oh,
along with
for
it.
Did I
sure.
miss them on like
Yeah, I'm gonna try and
yeah.
see.
Like I
But
said,
what
I
a
read
cool study. Like if you did do this with kids to
uh-huh.
gives the kids the opportunity. Who wants to read the graphic novel? Who
Compare
wants to read the original? Would be interesting to see which
for
ones
sure.
gravitated to what
Yes.
and their takeaways separately.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, that would be a
like
great
just
comparison.
this page, Kim, I thought was fascinating when the dad
Oh
killed
yeah.
he killed the bad guy for killing his brother, and he
Yeah.
goes in his shower and he just lays there.
Yeah.
And it's just
Oh
the
wow.
sadness that you felt there. And then you go to the next one and you actually see, I mean, there are definitely, that's where I could see you're going to need parent, permission
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Oh
with,
yeah.
things like that. But just the feeling you had on pages that didn't even have, any words. I thought the pop, 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 you saw
Mm.
that a lot in the graphic novel, and it would be bright red,
Yep.
Yeah.
the sign of kill. And when he has his interaction with his dad, which I thought was really sweet because they did a great job really making it look, he will look just like his dad.
Mm.
But was it the dad holds the gun up to his head?
Yes.
And oh my gosh, I was gonna lose it. And he's like, "What are you doing, man?" And then he's going pop, 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 like dad, 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 but really he's doing shot, shot, shot. There's just so many connections across this book. And everybody just died so young.
Mhm.
It was just so sad. But I loved when they were talking about his dad and he didn't remember memories but they kept talking about a Halloween story with his dad when he dressed up as Michael Jackson and was doing
Right in the
Yeah.
elevator
and I
and
love in the
moonwalked.
graphic
Dang.
novel, this is great.
Yes.
They're showing him, you know, as Michael
Yeah. Yeah.
Jackson and the Halloween. And I just was like, okay, because not everyone's gonna probably know, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Who
Yeah. Yeah.
that is. So the pictures definitely added a whole new.
I have a question. What did you think of the mom? Because she needed like did she just have like a skin issue or was she like a drug addict or what? Is she or
That.
like alcohol or what?
Well, they talk about it as being eczema, but it also says that she drank a lot.
Yes.
Yep.
So was she a druggie to cope with all of her other
Hmm.
things? But the fact that she
And
really
that would
did need a
track.
special soap, was it a special soap? Or was he on
Mhm.
a pickup?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
You don't really know, you
Mhm.
know?
And like the picking, the constant picking at the skin,
Yes.
like that almost sounds like a
Heroin addict.
drug addict's
Uh-huh.
tick, and something that doesn't track with, you know, eczema or something like that.
Mhm.
Hmm.
I and I liked your question too, asking if she just kind of, she knew that she couldn't save her sons or her husband, so she just kind of gave up. And it kind of brought back in certain communities where that's life. There is a certain, cynicism or, like nihilism associated with, well, even if I, go to school and get my education, how am I going to go to college, unless I get a scholarship or unless I, do this. And so many, getting an education and going to school and doing, the best that you can is only one piece of the puzzle,
Hmm.
Mhm.
because so many, it's like, you know, they have kind of this feeling of why would I even try?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I saw that with several of my students by fifth grade. They would literally say, when I'm 16, I'm going to drop out and sell drugs.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And because it was just this, even by the time they were 10 and 11, had kind of, that's what they had seen. That's what, they saw people doing that. That was what they were ingrained in. And it would take so much, not just their own willpower,
Mhm.
but so much support from, various other people. A teacher themselves couldn't do it. The community themselves couldn't do it. It was, so seeing the mom, it definitely fit in with that, kind of cynicism that I've seen in that community where it's like, well, this is the way of it. That's what
Yeah.
it's gonna be.
It reminded me of a couple of things. One, there's movies of, you have these kids in these small towns and, they're, they might be football, they're big athletes or they're, and they just want to get out of the small town to like, make something of themselves. And it's so very hard to do that. I also thought of The Wire. Do you know of The Wire?
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
It was a TV series. It was filmed in Baltimore, and actually, I'm from Maryland, and it's all about police, and they're in like this drug war. It goes into like the school system where there's a police officer who got out of the force and became a teacher, and he has these kids in his class that are you know, they they're they're into drugs, violence,
Mm.
and like he really tries to connect with these kids. And he wound up connecting with one. He would even like the kid would have like the same clothes on all the time. And so um he bought the kid like an extra set of clothes and he would wash them. And the kid would come in early and change into them so that, the kids would make fun of him. And this teacher mentored this kid and he was smart. And at the very end, he winds up becoming a drug dealer and he became addicted to drugs. So it also reminded me of recidivism, these
Mm.
people who go to jail and, it's hard to break that cycle.
Yeah.
And, I wish like there was this like magic wand that you could go, please, you know, believe in yourself, make,
Don't think this is your only option.
yeah. But
Yeah.
what they see is that's what they see though. They're
Yeah.
surrounded by it.
It's interesting that you brought up The Wire because I know, do you remember the movie that came out about Ron Clark? It was
Oh,
Chandler
yeah,
Bing
yeah.
from Friends,
Uh-huh.
ended up being the teacher in the movie. And it's a true story. I've been to Ron Clark's Academy. I don't remember. It was like my first 5 years teaching. They asked what teachers would want to go. I got to spend the whole day with him. I cried the entire day. He is the most animated. I literally called him Willy Wonka. He looked like Willy Wonka. He was wearing a purple velvet long jacket, these crazy pants. His energy was insane. And to know he goes into New York City teaching in an inner city situation, not one kid cared about him. They made fun of him, whatever. And he was like, I got to quit. I got to quit. And then all of a sudden, he has this epiphany. I'm going to save every single one of these kids. And he did. And they went on to they broke their cycles. They got out of the bad family, ties, the drug dealing, all this. And it was such a success story. And now he's got Ron Clark's Academy. He's got a bunch of them,
Oh,
but knowing he has the one in Atlanta and we got to go to it, see, these kids don't come from the best of backgrounds
uh-huh.
and they're brilliant. I'm in
Yes.
sitting in an algebra class being like, I'm a moron. I mean, I was just in there singing and they know all these raps and dances. And to see that one teacher can just change the trajectory for so many kids.
Hmm.
The Wire obviously was a rough situation and didn't pan out probably the way he did, but that boy at some point felt so loved. And if
Oh,
you
yes.
asked who loved you the most, he would totally say it had to be him,
And
right?
he
Yeah.
actually connected with a couple of kids. Um, and like would shelter them. It just like, and it was the police community. There were a bunch of different police officers that were working together, to save some of these kids.
What makes
Yeah.
you think, like with Will's situation, you think about his age, right? did he ever have counseling? Did he ever I mean, his dad was killed when he was basically what, about 3 with the
Mhm.
timeline, I would assume. He
Mhm.
loses his brother as a young teenager. He's lost his uncle. There's been so much death. Has he ever been taught appropriate coping skills? No, because you look at the rules that he was told he had to abide by, right?
Mhm.
His mom made the comment, like, don't walk with the night. And that was her hint, don't go down the same path, but never really explained what that meant.
Mhm.
You know, Will was always in survival and didn't even realize he was always in survival. So
Yeah.
if you have kids like now, if you've lost your teacher or you've lost a student in the classroom or even within the school, they immediately put counselors on every hallway. They immediately
Yeah.
start, they put things in place to help kids they need to learn how to cope because that's not an innate, ability for any of
Mhm.
us.
For sure.
I bet he never had that. Like, did
Yeah. Oh,
his
yeah.
mom tell the school system? No, his dad was killed,
Hush,
his
hush.
uncle was killed, because obviously mom couldn't keep it
Mm,
together.
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So did he think he now had to be her rescuer? But
Mm.
then if he killed somebody, he's definitely not going to be her rescuer. And then she's going to have nobody. And most likely, what's mom going to do? If she's a druggie, she's probably going to overdose, drink herself
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
death. I mean,
Yeah.
wow, just a very intense situation. And to know it's actually real life for some is just
Yes. Yes.
incredible.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah. And I had thought too with, all of these systemic things that would have to change to actually, improve it. One of the questions that you would ask made me think about, if their not obsession with revenge, but their method of, seeking revenge and seeking justice was very much handled within the community.
Mhm.
And I was thinking in other communities, if something were to happen, and typically, when you're nice suburban neighborhoods that are far removed from this, you typically don't encounter this. But even if there was something where somebody, caused a wrongful death or an accident that happened, these nice suburban communities usually seek the justice system
Mhm.
Mhm.
as the method of revenge. They'll sue, they'll use their,
Yes.
knowledge, they will use, words and lawyers to seek revenge. Whereas, in these communities where they don't trust law enforcement, they don't trust the judicial system
Mhm.
because it's, what have you done for me? Or if
I got to
by
take.
the time that this actually gets put into trial, it's going to be however many months, if not years.
Mhm.
And in the meantime, what else will happen? So it's just this cyclical thing of, everything around, I think, kind of creates this perfect storm of, what leads somebody to not seek, counseling or therapy or, justice from the judicial system or
Mhm.
lawyers or something like that.
Absolutely. I mean, and you look at chapter 6, you're trying to understand how to justify the concept of violence, right? So, looking at your community, how are you willing to solve for the revenge in a healthy manner or not so healthy manner? And it started making me think. I don't know about y'all, but since I've been teaching, I feel like kids have become more aggressive over time. Um, the video games, the TV shows that they watch, their early access. Like, you have kids on TikTok, and it's like my kids, they get on Alexa, and I'm like, I didn't like that word. What are you watching? Um, the monitoring that needs to be in place that's not. The video games this year for my students,
Mm.
they always talk, oh, I got to shoot all these guys and take them out. And it made me think, and I put it as one of my questions,
Yep.
was the concept of, do they actually understand the violence of what they're doing? Because it's not always a police officer in the game shooting bad guys.
Right. Yeah.
It's people just shooting people. Well,
Yep.
what's the goal? Well, you're just supposed to shoot them. Well, why? Do they understand what violence is? Do they understand when they're shooting a character that it's not real life? because then
Mhm.
you've seen so many stories on, the news and the media where it's like, oh, they got confused. They forgot what was real life and what was not.
Yeah.
And that's very scary. And you look at technology in general, the addiction that that's created, just
Uh-huh.
Oh my
scrolling
gosh.
on, social media.
Yes.
I mean, I have a little boy who does not sleep. He's got such a messed up family situation right now. And he has since he was very, very young. And no one's ever really helped him understand it, you know? And
Yeah.
I'll be like, you look exhausted today. And when he's exhausted, he's like a dog with the zoomies. Like he just,
Oh,
it just spirals
yeah.
out. And I'm
Hmm.
like, what is up with you? What time did you go to bed last night? He goes, oh, I didn't. I sat on the computer and I played a game where I got to talk. First off, you're letting your first grader he's talking to strangers on a video game. Like, where is parental control here? And then
Hmm.
everyone wonders why he's so aggressive. He
Hmm.
already has extreme trauma with some family situations that I don't understand why this child's not in therapy, but not everybody understands there's so many resources that we could help supply.
Hmm.
And I think there's a lot of embarrassment. Mom's
Hmm.
now back. She's in survival mode. She's doing Uber Eats and doing all these different things where who's really watching him and who's watching the 2-year-old brother because dad's not at home anymore. So it's in my community, even though I'm in a very silver platter community, we still have a handful of kids that they're so confused. They don't understand right from wrong. They've been dealt crappy cards and they don't even really realize they've been dealt crappy cards. It's their
Yeah.
norm.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
So for Will, it was his norm, you
Mhm.
know? It's brr.
Oh, yeah.
I
And,
am.
oh, go ahead.
I, you know, I've been a single mom before, and with 3 kids, and they were young, and I'm teaching, and so when I think of single moms, I have a different perspective about it. And if I could do it, working full time, 3 kids, young, they're all 2 years apart. I
Mhm.
don't, and I know, like, people are, they're just trying to make it.
Mhm.
They're single family homes, mom, dad, whoever is working until, as long as they can. They pick kids up from daycare late. That, they're probably, just rushing food. Parents are exhausted. Their money might not be, um, they might have financial issues. And like there is like they don't monitor. And these kids have phones, they have the iPads, and we have kids who are falling asleep in class, and come to find out,
Uh-huh.
they've got the iPad underneath the covers, but or a TV in their room, which is another thing, and or video games. I'm just like, you know our kids we our kids never had TVs in their room. And
Mhm.
that was a reason why. And then video
Mhm.
games, like they weren't allowed to get like an Xbox or PS whatever back then until they were at a certain age. And
Mhm.
cell phones, and granted, things are much different, but we've got first graders with cell phones. I'm like,
Oh
why?
yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. Well,
And they can
Correct.
push a button and Google, and sure enough, they have stuff. It's
Huh?
right there.
yeah.
It's but we don't have control over that.
No,
Yeah.
And
can't do it all.
it's yeah,
Well, and
I
it makes
Yeah.
you think when you do have kids like that, whether they're single family homes or a family that just struggles in general, if it's not kids sense, they
Hmm.
kids are not dumb by any means. They
Yeah.
sense things,
Uh-uh.
but they need help understanding what they think they're understanding and how to cope.
mhm,
So, like this year, I got a plethora of boys in my class that come from very, very messed up family situations. I've never had this many in my community at the
Yeah.
same
mhm,
time, you know?
mhm,
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and they all have severe anger issues.
mhm,
And if it's not helped, they will end up in EBD. And that's my
Yeah.
background. I used to do
Yeah.
self-contained emotional behavior disorders. So it made me think, if they are not monitored, and all of them are severely obsessed with either wrestling, football, just very aggressive sports, or very aggressive video games, their verbiage is aggressive. Even how they play has a tendency to be aggressive. So I was thinking, if they're not counseled and they're not guided through the emotions and help to understand their emotions, well, what emotional state is it permanently putting them in? Because at some point you level out. Like if you've experienced trauma, it's like when you start drugs, your brain actually suppresses at that age,
Yep.
you know? So are we putting kids to be vengeful? You know, does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
But then I also think there's a lot of protectiveness that people are trying to do, which I don't always think is the best. And I put in my notes here 9/11.
Yeah.
I am heartbroken. I remember exactly where I was when it happened.
Me
I
too.
was a sophomore in high school. And I have a friend whose dad was supposed to be on the Pennsylvania flight. And so when all this, and we're in our business class, so we're seeing all the news on our learning our computer skills, you know, and she's freaking out. Like my dad was supposed to be on that flight, and we're thinking, oh my gosh, this isn't happening. Like it was a nightmare, right? It shook everyone for the longest time. And I just remember, just as a high school student, how badly it impacted me. And I didn't know anybody that officially, he wasn't on that flight. His alarm never went off, just FYI. I mean, now it's Patriots Day, but we're not allowed to talk about any details. And I'm like, why? I mean, I think that's ridiculous, because in our Georgia
Yeah.
Studies Weekly, it talks about American heroes, and it talks about one of the little interviews when you click on videos on
Oh,
Georgia
yeah.
Studies Weekly. It's an interview with a girl who was in high school when it happened. And she immediately was like, I'm joining the Army.
Wow.
And it's her story of why she wanted to be a rescuer, to protect her country, and what patriotism truly is. So I acknowledge it. Well, then the 9/11 quiet time is either non-existent anymore, or they call it it's for patriots. No, that's not what it's originally
Wow.
for. And then it makes me think about all those people that were affected and to this day are so severely affected by it. Are we diminishing because we think we're protecting? It's like they comment about, you erase history, history repeats itself.
Mhm.
You can't just act like it never happened. Now, I'm
Right.
not going to tell my kids graphic details. They're 6 and
Yeah.
7. But then if you're not going to let us talk about that in 5th grade, why are we talking about the Holocaust and World War II?
Yeah.
You know? So is it a double standard? I don't understand. Yes, I think
Yeah.
there needs to be boundaries. So what
Mhm.
is an appropriate boundary and a healthy boundary for our students in their age groups?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I noted that too for, I mean, 5th grade standards, there's so much, there's World War II, there's, a ton of wars. I think 4th grade now is the American Revolution.
Mhm.
And one of the 5th grade social studies standards is to discuss the decision to drop the atomic bomb. And,
Mm.
like you say, it's not like I'm going to go in graphics and bring in,
Yeah.
terrible pictures or things like that. But I mean, there's no way to talk about the atomic bomb without bringing up, it killed a lot of people, and and the radiation affected, generations to come. And I mean, there are things on both sides, but it's, you can't escape violence there. And it's not like, we bring up, like I say, graphic pictures and, all of these things, but at a certain point, especially with history, the
Mhm.
goal being not to repeat it, you
Mhm.
can't eliminate all violence because that's not real world. There is violence. And
Mhm.
like the book mentioned too, like in defining violence, which I had never really thought about before,
Yeah, that was
you could
good.
have a violent storm that's not, a traumatic experience. It's not, a shooting or a stabbing or something intentional,
Mhm.
but, or you could have, something a violent death that's caused by an accidental reason,
Mhm.
or something natural that happens that results in violence. And with the whole video game and, that I definitely see like the desensitization
Mhm.
to, all of these things. And I think that's more the dangerous piece because I mean, history shows there's always people who have done terrible things, like if you were to go back to the earliest of all
Yeah.
mankind, there are people who do violent things for dumb reasons and for, what would be objectively determined a stupid reason. But now when you've got people who wouldn't necessarily do those things or aren't at risk of committing those violent acts themselves, when all of these things desensitize the people on the outskirts, then it becomes, they're more willing to permit
Mhm.
violent acts, or they're more willing to just kind of look the other way and not stand up when they do see an injustice. Um, and so that's, I think, kind of what the chapter was mentioning too about just desensitizing.
Mhm.
And what I've seen happen in the last several years of it's just kind of commonplace.
Yes. It's like, it's almost, yeah, it's like accepted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very sad. Very sad.
I know my last question that I had put in here. Where did you go? It was with your age group.
Yep.
What are moments in literature that have led to a violence talk within your own classroom? Because if you think about you're trying to define violence with your kids, like a violent storm or an accidental
Mm.
violent situation that has occurred that's led to a tragedy. I mean, I've taught through fifth grade. So then I was thinking about, like I told you guys the other day about reading The Witches with my
Mhm.
students. Man, that lead witch, she was a terror. I mean, she just pointed her finger and she just ashed you. You on fire, you dead, That was a very violent way to die,
Yeah.
and trying to explain. First off, that can't happen, guys,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
or, thinking about Theodore Roosevelt. We've been doing him this past week. He got shot when he was giving a speech, and the crazy man still spoke for an hour and a half. Well, why did he get shot? And then talking about, well, how ironic it was that to become the president, he was the VP, but then the president was assassinated. What's assassinated mean? I can't just not talk about it.
Right.
Even in the book, I'm supposed to be teaching from the county. So
Right.
there are violent conversations that have to be discussed, but there's boundaries that are also put in place. And when
Hmm.
they're wanting, the thing is, I think with my boys, especially for how into these video games they are, they understand a level. It's talking about code red. This I think is fascinating.
Oh,
When you talk about code red with your little kids versus Kim, your older kids,
Mhm.
my little kids now are like, oh, because there's a bad guy that's gonna come in and shoot us all up. And
Mhm.
immediately, how do
wow.
you have to shut that down? Well,
Hmm.
it could. I have to talk about what's your best interest. Sometimes there might be somebody who doesn't have our best interests at heart, you know? So you're not going to go down the rabbit hole with your crazy thoughts. Whatever
Yeah.
we're doing is to protect everybody in this classroom,
Hmm.
Yeah.
So where are they getting all those ideas? Right? They're seeing
Yeah.
it, they're hearing it. The news media, I mean, kids, if the news is on at home, they are hearing some things. They
Hmm.
might be
Yes.
seeing some things. So it's not just going to come from a video game. And they are listening when mom and dad do their talks,
Mhm.
especially when we have, you know, new presidential elections. It's hilarious to listen
Oh,
to my first graders tell me their mom and dad's opinions because they are
Yep.
their opinions.
Yep.
You know?
yes.
Oh, for sure.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah. Um, like with first grade, when we teach Ruby Bridges, there's that element of violence, the things that she went through and endured. And, you try to, you want to let her bravery shine, as, just this young child and her perseverance. but I mean, people are doing such bad stuff, and
Mhm.
just like the amount of hate that was present, um, it's a touchy situation when you're talking to these little kids.
For sure.
Um, yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's always, I don't know, even after 29 years, I'm in my 29th year of teaching, it's
That's awesome.
still, um, you still have those conversations where, you know, sometimes it will just say, well, you know what, everyone believes different things, you know, I would, go home and ask your mom or dad, what they think
Yeah.
about that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just because, I mean, we all do believe in different things.
For
And,
sure.
Yeah.
but you don't want to shelter them from history and reality at
Yeah.
the same time, even though they're little.
Oh
Mhm.
yeah. And that's typically where, violent conversations, if they come up, would be in a fifth grade classroom, for you're reading something with World War II, and they mention casualties, well, what does that mean? The Holocaust,
Mhm.
one of my book clubs now is reading The Boy in the Striped Pajamas.
Ooh, whoa.
And it is
What is that?
so it's a book about a
Tearjerker.
9-year-old boy, and he's, kind of naive. He's very sheltered, but he is a German boy in World War II, and his father is the commandant of Auschwitz. And he lives in that house, and he doesn't realize really what's going on. He's been sheltered, he's been naive, he doesn't realize what's happening, and ultimately it has a very tragic ending.
Mm.
And what I think is so powerful about that book is it's not violent, at all. And that's a book, fifth grade uses it at my school. And that will, we send out a letter, to
Mhm.
parents before, and we have one. So it's been in our book room. It's, approved by the county for upper level students. And what's
Mhm.
so poignant about that book, I think, is that it's not violent, is that it never goes into graphics. It never talks about, the terrible things that happened at the camp, because that's not the perspective. You're in the perspective of a 9-year-old German boy who just
Mhm.
happens to live close by.
Mhm.
Um, and so some of those discussions can kind of lead into violence, because when we give background on that book and have to explain, what's happening, we have to say,
And
well,
what his
Auschwitz
dad really
was,
does.
yeah, and it's a death camp, and a lot of Jewish people and others that, were not favorites of the German government at the time were put to death. And then we have to talk about, we do not get graphic, but we say, there might be gas chambers, or if somebody was too weak to work, they might be killed once they got there. And we never, like I say, it's never like, look at these pictures and analyze this, but they have to
Mhm.
understand
Mhm.
at some point the seriousness of this. We can't
Mhm.
make a concentration camp sound like, oh, it was, like you can't shield them from that. And I mean, we can shield them from some of the graphics that they might not be ready for at 11, but,
Mhm.
you know, let's teach you this so that you can be appalled by
Mhm.
it. Because if you're appalled by it, you won't
Do it.
stand for it. That's
Mhm.
the goal. Yeah.
You don't stand for it. I mean, I think hands down with the chapter and with the book that we read, I would agree probably with all of us that we would have the same feeling. It's important to define violence.
Mhm.
Whether you're
Mhm.
reading the Boy in the Striped Pajamas, whether you're reading Squabbling Squirrels, it's the only picture
Yeah.
book or Sophia the Angry, she
Mhm.
blows her stack and has
Yes.
violent behavior. What does that
Mhm.
mean? She's throwing a massive temper tantrum.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Um, Howard B. Wigglebottom. We watch those with our
Yep.
counselors all the time, and they're so funny. But he does have violent behavior and throws himself around and pitches a fit and screams at his friends. Violence has different levels.
Mhm.
So knowing our community, I think, is crucial. I think even surveying your community is good, depending on age group, surveying your own students, parent involvement, depending on what type of violence you're speaking of, like you guys do,
100%.
the boy with, striped pajamas,
Yep. Yep.
having counselors involved. I mean, I think it takes a variety of things on our part
Mhm.
But I think what's cool about the chapters that we've been doing over the last few weeks, it's really changed my mindset when I am reading books with my kids. Like we literally just read Squabbling Squirrels. And I'm like, well, there really was violent moments in that.
Yeah.
And then we just did Martin Luther King and he was assassinated and they were talking about spraying, the people with hoses. And they were like, well, that's not bad. It's fun to play in sprinklers. I'm like, oh, you don't understand the force.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was very violent. Well, did it kill people? So it does lead to certain conversations, but no, they're not playing in a sprinkler, guys. It wasn't like, wee, let's run
Yeah.
and cool down,
Yeah.
Um, there
Mhm.
has to be healthy boundaries when it
Mhm.
comes to conversations, whether you're talking about violence or you're talking about gender,
Mhm.
I just think Dr. O's done a really good job lining these up perfectly to
My
match with
goodness.
the multicultural book, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
I agree. I mean, and considering, I don't like reading. I'm not an avid reader. I'm not, I'm not. I like kids' books, but I have most definitely enjoyed reading. And I think I don't like it almost seems like they're getting better and better as we go on.
Mhm.
So yeah, hopefully I'll be able to find get that is it Refugee? Get it
Yes.
on the library.
Yeah.
Um
And it's a, good book. And Alan Gratz is very, he's
He's a
a
lot of the book
fantastic
here.
author. And so many of my students, I mean, especially some of my boys, love Alan Gratz.
okay.
And I mean, for, my readers who don't like to read as much, the books in verse. So I wouldn't necessarily have this one in class, but like books like Out of the Dust, or we read one, or at least excerpts of one called House Arrest. And I think I'd mentioned that one
Mm.
before, about a boy who's on house arrest. He's 12 years old and stole a credit card to pay for medicine for his younger brother, and all of these things. And he's not violent, but he's very um, self doubt, negative talk all the time, very angry, very clenched fists, full of rage. And so it's his story all the way through. And I find that those stories in verse are so good because you have to pay attention, I think, to all of the words
Mhm.
and to how they're laid out. And there's so much meaning, just like in this one, in every single word, like you don't have the author who just goes into, and then they walk down the hallway and then they turn over their shoulder. It cuts out some of that stuff, which sometimes makes it harder to, visualize, or especially conversations between two characters. Sometimes that gets a little tricky. And my
Mhm.
students always, with books in verse, always get a little tripped up by that. But I love those because the focus is so much on the meaning
Mhm.
I
of the book.
I
so you
liked this one.
Yeah,
cool.
yes.
It was so, I mean, it's literally the word right. How many
Hmm.
times? And then the dot is Sean, you know?
Yeah.
Um, Very powerful. And I think what's cool working with your older kids, that's why I enjoy teaching older kids, is doing book studies like this, because there's so much more underlying meaning when it's like reading between the lines, but are you natural at reading between the lines?
Hmm.
Some people have to
Yeah.
be taught how to read between the
Yeah.
lines.
Hmm.
So the verse concept is just,
Mhm.
it's brilliant.
Yeah, I
And
like
that's, yeah.
I've you had asked about like have we read any books with verse? And the only one that I could think of was Love That Dog. Um
Mm.
and so I said I'm not an avid reader, but you know, you read the words and in Long Way Down too. Like the way I said the words feel like they're being stomped into my heart and my soul.
Mm.
It's almost like you can feel what the characters are feeling. And
Yes.
that I think is like super, super powerful. And I took that from Love That Dog and from Long Way Down. That you do feel like this
Mm.
intense emotion because of the way the words are written and um yeah, just the meaning, definitely.
So good.
And
Yeah.
just by the change in fonts too, the
Yeah.
Mhm.
different fonts used in the overall focus on meaning. And that's what I do use to teach my students to read between the lines, because
Mhm.
that's, trying to go from more literal to abstract, and verse is fabulous for that.
Mhm.
I need to be in your class.
I know. It would be so much fun.
There are
Well,
so
keep
many
reading.
good
Just
books
keep
out
giving
there,
us some books. I
yes.
wanted to ask you guys, speaking of that. So we've been talking about books. Like when you guys say books, I immediately write them down because it's
Me
something
too.
I want to look into. But on the midterm, it's really just evaluating where you're at, what you've been learning, what you would
Oh,
have
you took it.
changed.
Okay.
So it's 5 questions. So you just type your answers. But one of them was what's one thing you would change? And I said, honestly, I wouldn't change anything. I want to add. I think it'd be really cool. So I think everyone should put this in there. I told my buddy Kristen to add it to hers. If there was an opportunity for us to have either a live chat session or have like a live document that we all have access to, and we start creating our own genres, our own picture books, own age groups of books that you just
Mhm.
would highly recommend, that would
Yep.
create good conversation with your students.
Yep.
Because I mean, there's books that Kim, I'm pretty sure, like I know you've said Boy in Striped Pajamas. I know it's also a movie. I would love to
Yeah.
read the book.
Yep.
I've never read, House Arrest, but when you talked about that, the concept of that and can you justify his actions
Mm.
kind of thing. What a great book that I think that would be. So I would
Mhm.
like to know older grade level books. Because then you
Yeah.
do get the freaky situation where you have like a first grader who's like talking to an eighth grader.
Yeah.
I've had some of them, and man, do they blow my mind. They teach me probably more than they've learned in
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
right? But to be able to have access to things, 'cause
100%.
now that we're steering away from DRAs next year,
Mhm.
it's interesting the concept of, well, what books do you read with your kids? So, well, we're not doing Lexile levels. We're not, doing all these things that usually give a list of here's books that you could check out. Parents
Mhm.
are the ones that want to know. Want to,
Right.
well, what book do I
Mhm.
get my kid? Well, it's hard to
Yes.
help with that now, so it would be nice to have access to new material
Mhm.
for
Oh, yeah.
sure.
Agreed.
But yeah, guys, we went over. We did so good. I just think
Yeah.
we're professional book clubbers and so
Absolutely.
much fun.
I'm definitely enjoying this.
Well,
For
good.
Thank
sure.
you,
We
ladies.
did
You two
great
have been
this.
great.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun,
Yeah.
Good.
but great feedback. So I'll get all those notes typed up and sent to Dr. O. But I appreciate all y'all's time and putting
Yeah.
forth the effort. I've read 3 books in 2.5 weeks. Write it
Yeah.
down, and they're fun,
Yeah. Yeah.
definitely pushing me beyond my limits. And I like learning. So
Yes.
it's great.
I'll email you tomorrow to let you know if I got a copy.
That sounds
Okay.
awesome.
Sounds good.
So I'm going to go ahead, officially stop.
All right.